Welcome, and we'll start, of course, with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Look at the screen share. So we start a new Parsha, of course, and that is the Parsha of Emor. And one of the reasons Emor is quite significant is actually that later on in this Parsha, we will read about the festivals of the Jewish year. And so this Parsha gets read on many festivals, that is to say, the pilgrim festivals. But it does mention the others too. So, but the beginning of it deals with, again, where we've been focusing at one point at the beginning of the book, we started focusing on sacrifices. We then focused on the installation of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. And then we had other various laws that applied across the board to Israelites as well. And we return here to issues of priesthood. And perhaps if I were to give you any background on this, it's to say that the higher up the social pyramid you go, the more responsibilities you have, that goes automatically. And since the priests are supposed to represent devotion to Hashem, there are restrictions that they have that are especially towards priests as opposed to others. And we need to be able to understand what it is to truly put God first. And that's what they have to do. So you'll see in this way how this works. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So Hashem said to Moses, Emor el HaKohanim, say to the Kohanim, the priests, B'nei Aharon, sons of Aaron, Va'amarta alehem, and look at this repetition, and say to them, the nefesh lo yitama pa'amav. So the Hebrew here is not very, very clear, but what it means is, literally it means for a soul, he shall not defile himself amongst his people. So that just sort of raises more questions than answers, but we are going to refine exactly what is meant by this. So Rashi, Emor el HaKohanim, say to the priests. And he just gives you the Talmudic background here, Yevamot Pei Hey, that's 85, and Torah Kohanim. And that, of course, as we know, is the Sifra. Emor, so it says Emor, it says Va'amarta in this passage. Why the duplication? The Hazhir Gedolim al Haktanim. The purpose of that is to, literally it means to warn adults regarding minors. In other words, that generally speaking, minors are exempt from mitzvot, from many of the mitzvot, certainly many of the positive commandments, but here we are told that the adults are to make sure that their minor children also observe what is going to come up, the following mitzvah. That in this case, the adult Kohanim are responsible to make sure that the children also observe this. B'nei Aharon, literally it says, the sons of Aaron. Here, B'nei Aharon, and in Kiddushin, again, a different Talmudic tractate, Lamed Hey, page 35, Yachol Chalalim. We might include Chalalim. So in other words, this emphasis on B'nei Aharon, children of Aharon, and I need to explain what a halal means. Literally, halal is from a word that means the opposite of sacred. It means non-sacred. And what is a halal? If a priest marries one of the forbidden people, and we'll see that priests are forbidden to marry certain classes of people, and they go ahead and do it anyway, the children of that marriage are considered halalim. That is to say, they are no longer priests. They no longer carry with them the sanctity of a priest. And that's who we're referring to now. Also, I can tell you that as long as a priest remains in that marriage, he also is absolved of his priesthood. Now, if he divorces or is no longer married to that person, he becomes a priest. He can regain his sanctified status, but the children are never going to be priests. They will never be able to be. And that's why it says, so it's saying maybe the halalim would be included in the commandment about not defiling themselves. Talmud lomar hakohanim. And that's why scripture states specifically kohanim. So go ahead.
I have a question. So the opposite, if the woman is a Kohen and she marries like a Levite,
Yes.
such as my parents did.
Yes.
So does that have anything to do with this sentence, or is it covered elsewhere?
Okay, so it is covered elsewhere, although we'll see that the Bnei Aharon in the Torah Temimah covers kohanot, that is female kohanim, and it does not apply to them. And in fact, because women do not serve at the altar, they do not do not don the garments. It is something that only is attributed to men. Only a man can be a priest. However, the woman he marries has certain perks that come along with him. And so she becomes entitled to those perks, but she does not minister at the altar. And so we see in another passage, you'll see that women are not forbidden to become defiled, etc. A woman priest is permitted to marry. A priest is allowed to marry a Levite woman. He's also allowed to marry an Israelite woman. A priest is allowed to do that. He is not allowed to marry a mamzeret, but even an Israelite isn't supposed to marry a mamzeret. And there are ways in which that can eventually become clear over a generation. But it will tell you exactly who a priest is not. He's not allowed to marry a halal. So in other words, a priest would not be allowed to marry the offspring of a forbidden union between a priest and the one the priest is not allowed to marry. So I believe that a priest would not be allowed to marry such a person, but it's not to do with, a priest is allowed to marry non-priests who are Jewish, who are born Jewish or born Israelite.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So Bnei Aharon, another time, so it says Bnei Aharon, second time, that Rashi's commenting on this, Af ba'alei mumim b'mashma. But what it does include, okay, so Bnei Aharon excludes chalalim, okay, but it includes ba'alei mumim, meaning priests that have some kind of blemish. And these blemishes are described again in this parsha, and these blemishes prevent the priest from ministering at the altar. They cannot minister at the altar, but at the same time, they are allowed to benefit. They're still considered priests, and they're still allowed to benefit from the perks of a priest. So in this case, it's inclusive, that just because this particular priest has a blemish that might render him ineligible to serve at the altar doesn't mean he should not follow this. It's not here, of course, we're not talking about perks. We're saying about allowing himself to become defiled on account of a person who has passed away. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the people that a priest is allowed to mourn for. But it's more than mourning. It means to be present, because we know from another passage that tumat mate, that the impurity that is caused by a dead body, is a very, very high level. In fact, it is the highest level of impurity. And so that's why we're talking about it. But here we are saying that Baal Mum is included. And these might well be questions. One might say, well, wow, what is the situation with these? So the interpretation of the Torah renders it clear who's included and who's excluded. Another B'nai Aharon, another interpretation of B'nai Aharon, and here we are, Lisa, V'lo Benot Aharon. So here we're understanding B'nai Aharon to mean males. So not the daughters of Aaron, not Kohanot. We can't call them priestesses because we really don't have priestesses, but they do have women who are born to a family of Kohanim, do have certain, there are certain senses in which they are distinguished from other Israelites or Levites. Lo yitama ba'amav, shall not defile himself amongst his people, literally, right? So the Torah Kohanim, the Sifra says, Ba'od shehamet betoch amav. This is really, you'll see, this is actually very interesting. It means that as long as the deceased is amongst his people, meaning that there are people to take care of the deceased, that there are people who will make sure that he or she gets a proper burial, is that the body is properly taken care of, etc., etc. Yatsa meit mitzvah. So what does it not include? This concept of meit mitzvah. So if you've never heard of this concept, it's an important concept. And a meit mitzvah means we're talking about someone who has no one, is in a situation like an abandoned body, right? That someone who's sort of left in the road or left in a field or has no one, absolutely no one to make sure that they're properly cared for regarding burial and proper care of the body. Because I'm sure you all know that when someone passes away, the body is treated with a tremendous amount of respect by the Chevra Kadisha. They're responsible for that and for preparing the body for burial, etc., etc. So what this is saying is that if a priest who under normal circumstances is not allowed to defile himself or become impure on account of a corpse, in this particular case, he is obligated to take the meit mitzvah, to take care of it. It supersedes everything. It's such an important mitzvah. Okay, I see I have some chats, so I'll see if there's anything. Okay. Yes. The issue of a virgin is a Kohen Gadol. Only the Kohen Gadol has to marry a virgin. A regular priest is allowed to marry a widow. He's allowed to. But you're right. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. Okay, these are hard to swallow for in our own culture, but they're there, and we can decide either to try to understand whether we agree or we don't agree. That's what I'm saying. When you're putting God first, that's what it involves at times. So you have to think about it. In going on, here we go. Ki only. This is where ki means only. Im l'she'ero, with regard to his relative. Akarov elav, who is close to him. And you'll see, what's this? Rashi, im l'she'ero, ein she'ero ela ishto. And what this means is his wife. So he is allowed to mourn for his wife, for sure. Okay. And we might think, well, come on. And the truth is that a high priest is forbidden from any mourning at all. A high priest is forbidden.
Including his parents and his children and his siblings, just his wife.
No, not even his wife. We're not talking about a high priest here. We're just talking about a priest.
But I mean, in this case,
yes. Go on.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. There's more coming up. So
yes, let's keep going.
Because I can't understand how that could be either.
Of course. Understood. And again, he's allowed to mourn le'imo, for his mother, ula aviv, and for his father, ulivno, and for his son, ula vito, and for his daughter, ula achiv, and for his brother. I'll just keep going because obviously there's a relative we haven't mentioned, which is his sister. V'la achoto, and for his sister, habetula, who is virgin, hakrova elav, who is close to him. That's going to have to be interpreted. Asher lo haita la'ish, who has never had relations with a man. La itama, he may defile himself for her. So hakrova means, in this case, this is talking about the sister. Lerabot et ha'arusa, and the reason why it says krova is it's to include, lerabot, to include et ha'arusa, that is the woman who is not yet married. There were two stages of marriage that are part of Jewish law. The first stage is erusin, arusa, which we could maybe translate loosely as engagement. But someone who is arusa is not yet nisu'ah, and nisu'ah is the second stage of the marriage, the process where she actually enters his home and is physically enjoys conjugal relations.
This one translates it as betrothal, and I like that a little bit better because that kind of sounds more ritualistic and promising, whereas in modern casual times you can get engaged, unengaged at the drop of a hat, but betrothal is kind of more of a promise.
Right. It's good. It's good. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. We really have to be conscious of the fact that this is all new for us, for those who've never sort of seen this before and are unfamiliar with it. Okay. Let's see. Do we have anything that we need to look at? No. Okay. So we now know who, and obviously there would be someone to mourn for his sister, right? His parents could mourn for his sister, and or rather, certainly his mother could, but his father, the priest, could mourn for his sister because it's his daughter. Okay, and certainly the point about this being that she's her husband and her children should be mourning for her, and being willing to do this, and of course if she's married to a priest, if his sister's married to a priest, he also is obligated to mourn for her. These are strictly laws involving priests. Please understand, they are not referring to Israelites. Okay. Here we go. Lo yitama ba'al ba'amav lahechalo. And this is where it says, this is specifically referring to a husband, in this case, should not render himself impure amongst his people, lahechalo. And it's saying if he's married to a woman who renders him a halal, in other words, one of the women he is not permitted to marry, if he goes ahead and does it anyway, he is not allowed to make himself impure on that account. He's not allowed to mourn for her. So you realize, I know that in our society, love is like a god, right? We treat love as if it's a god. And so, the natural instinct is to say, but what if he falls in love? That's a justification. And so they looked at love. I mean, the Greeks certainly understood love as a goddess, but Jewish tradition only has one God. And remember, this is strictly talking about, it's not that love isn't important, but love is, I think, understood beyond lust, although I think it might, in some cases, certainly, it is part of the consideration. Lord,
Yeah, and it also says ba'amav, which I didn't hear you translate, among when she's among his people.
Yes, right, because if she's a make mitzvah, he has to take care of her. Any make mitzvah, they go through. I'm anticipating. I'm not saying that Rashi's going to necessarily say this, but they give an example of the high priest who's on his way to the temple to perform the Yom Kippur rites, and he comes across a make mitzvah. He has to defile himself for the make mitzvah. They show through an interpretation of all these various specifications in the verse that say to exclude, in other words, this issue of not defiling oneself, to exclude a mate mitzvah. And as I said, they give that example of the high priest who's on his way to take care of Yom Kippur. That's how important it is. So this is a way of reinforcing that. Lord yitama bal ba'amav lahechalo, right? So again, let's just go straight into the Rashi. Lo yitma leishto psula. He should not defile himself for a woman who is unfit, right? Who he is not supposed to marry. Shehu mechulal ba, through whom he becomes profaned. The oda imo, while she is still with him. V'chem pshuto shel mikra, and likewise the simple meaning of the text, lo yitama baal b'she'ero, that a person should not, that this priest should not defile himself through his kin, right, with his relatives, but od shehi betoch amav, while she is still amongst his people. Sheyesh la, here we go, this is the issue. Sheyesh la kovrim, because she has people who will take care of her needs to be buried, take care of her burial requirements. She'ena mate mitzvah, that is to say, that she is not a mate mitzvah. Uve'eza she'er amarti, and with which relative did I, this is as it were, scripture speaking or God speaking, which relative am I talking about? But oto, with the one, shehi lahechalo, the one who renders him a halal, lehit chalel hu mikahunato, to render him profane from serving as a priest. And I suppose this might be a good place for me to stop and allow for comments. So I'm going to pop that in here. Okay, because we actually get onto a different issue now with regards to where priests are distinguished regarding what they're permitted to do. So more chats today than I've seen in a long time.
We were talking about shtisel now, which is a really good Israeli program about ultra Orthodox family. The father's this real old-fashioned rabbi, and the son is an artist, very sensitive soul, and it's all about like love and relationships and you know what that means and how it fits into their community and things like that.
Right.
Haredi soap opera is what it is.
I watched
really well done.
I watched the first two series. It is very good. It was very engaging.
The third is oh yeah, you'll need tissues.
Okay, because we watched the first where all of a sudden his wife is no longer living. It just didn't seem to make sense.
No spoilers, please.
No spoilers to people who have not yet seen it. Don't even talk about it. It's the best Haredi soap opera.
It's right there in the beginning.
Plot. Just not the plot.
I'm not. Okay.
I think it makes a lot more sense than Downton Abbey. It flows so much.
Okay.
And there's so many
more realistically
good jokes and stuff.
I don't know. We really
jokes.
thought it was handled very well to begin with. There's definitely humor in it. No question about that.
I think it's one of the best shows I've seen of any genre.
I'll talk to Susie and I were sharing it, and I'll tell her we need to give it another shot. So on your say-sos. Let's go back to the issues of this particular parsha. Any other questions, please? Jocelyn, do you have a question? Hello?
No.
She says nope.
Muted.
Yeah, but the chat says nope.
Oh, okay. I just saw the chat. Trying to focus on what's going on here. Okay. Anything else? I mean, please feel free.
It so doesn't matter anymore. This whole I mean, some of it does, but I mean, I understand because I have Kohanim in the family that cannot go to funeral services.
Yes.
I mean, it's even, you know, and it was, but they would, what they would do is they would stand outside.
Correct. Correct.
Right.
That's what they do.
And do that from there. But we also know somebody who's married somebody who was, who rendered them not able to do their duties.
Right.
Right.
Right. No, it's very tough on some levels. It really is.
But the priestly duties these days, I mean, really, are there
Yes.
priestly duties these days? I
Yes.
mean,
They're-
other than
Blessing-
having the,
blessing the people.
There are
You
two
still
pri-
bless the congregation.
Right. That's one of them. And the second one is Pidyon Haben. You need a
Yeah.
priest in order to redeem your firstborn.
We're
Those-
going to a Pidyon Haben in half an hour.
Mhm.
Ooh, there you go.
Very cool. Very cool.
So
So
I hope
yeah,
they've got their Kohen all lined up.
that's right. That's right.
I'm sure
We-
there's a few in town.
we did a Pidyon Haben for Miles, and actually he was, and we got Jerry Cohen to be our Kohen for us.
Yep.
So yeah, it doesn't happen
Sweet
too.
man.
I haven't gotten done to do a lot of them in the course of my rabbinate. What else? I'm just trying to think. Oh, I think sort of the takeaway, right? That's true.
that I know, but that's, you know, it's not, yeah.
Jocelyn mentions the first Aliyah to the Torah. You're right.
But no, and
do have-
some
they do have a-
synagogues have stopped doing that.
That's true.
But that is a
Mhm.
perk for
And
sure.
the priestly blessings as well.
Well, that's
Yes.
right. Yeah, I know. I've never actually officiated, when at a service where we've done the duchening, the priestly blessing, but it's probably a very
Why is
beautiful thing.
Why is that?
I don't feel trained enough to do it. In other words, I feel I'd want to
Oh.
know more halachot and to do it. If I'm going to do it, I'd want to I'm not Kohen, but if I have to supervise it, I want to make sure I know how to do it.
Well,
Yeah.
I thought that
Right.
you had told us that one of your reasons for not doing it was that the modern day people who were part of the Kohen status did not live impure, priestly lifestyles, but basically just lived modern day lifestyles where they, some of them weren't kosher for instance,
Right.
where they just kind of lived their own modern life without really considering what it meant to be a priest, and that you didn't want to take part in it because of that.
Right. I think as I've gotten older, I've become less judgmental and feeling more that it's my own, I have to
Oh.
make sure my own house is in order and, other people. But you're right. I mean, I think those would be good reasons, frankly.
Jocelyn, that's not true that no one does that outside of Orthodoxy. I know conservative synagogues that do not do that anymore,
Mhm.
including one in St. Louis out of the two.
Right.
Yeah, but not ours. Yes.
Well,
Not yet.
Jocelyn raises an interesting.
Speaking from the Levites in the room, yes.
Let me just say, Jocelyn raises the issue point that we don't distinguish regarding. I don't use that argument to prevent a Kohen from taking the first Aliyah, right? But the reason if I were to hold on to these kinds of things, right, and I were to argue it over that way, my argument would simply be that when a Kohen is blessing the congregation, they're acting with regards to being an intermediary on other people. When a Kohen takes the first Aliyah, they're basically taking it for themselves. All right. So I think there's a distinction to be made when you are actually responsible, in a sense, for a whole community. And I think that blessing the community is that kind of thing, as opposed to taking the first Aliyah. And I'm not saying that's a compelling argument, but that's what I
Do you have the same issue with a shaliach zibor?
That actually almost got me fired from one of my congregations.
Okay. Because
I don't.
I mean,
I have
right.
I have not, honestly, I feel making those kinds of distinctions, having lived my life as long as I have, and recognizing that I'll put it this way, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, okay? And
Right. Don't push away, bring it.
That's correct. And my job really is defined as lahagdil Torah ulahadira, to magnify the Torah and make it glorious. And if I behave in those kinds of ways, to stop Kohanim because they're not pure enough, etc., I'd be just, making myself and the Torah odious. And I don't want to do that. I don't.
All well and good if you want to collect flies.
Yeah, I can. If you're a chameleon, they're useful.
If you're- Okay, well, very good, Rabbi, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to stop the recording.